Lewin. I'm the federal director of the Federal Cloud Computing Program. I work at GSA, and I've been working on this for about 2 years. Mr. Trippy?
Hi, I'm Keith Trippy. I don't know if this is on, but I'm pretty loud. Before we get started, can you let everybody in the hallway know that this is a more fun group than social media? This way. We're not competing with that, but why not? Security can be fun, right? So I'm Keith Trippy. I'm with DHS. I'm responsible for the cloud strategy for the department, also deploying enterprise applications and services. So obviously a big fan of what Katie is doing, and also we have some partners here on the panel that we're already actively working with. So excited about this discussion. Look forward to easy questions.
Hard questions.
Hi, I'm Douglas Grice. I'm principal of Aerospace, which is one of the 9 TPO providers that was recently accredited under the FedRAMP PMO program. And we are the assessment body or inspection body for cloud service providers, and we are one of the nine organizations that will be conducting the assessments.
I'm Patrick Cronin from CJAC Federal. I'm an executive consultant, and I did a lot of the security architecture work on our cloud. I was with the assessors as we went through our IAS, GSA ETO. I also lead one of the working groups for Protect America, and we supplied a lot of comments from industry to the FedRAMP process.
Okay, so we have a pretty illustrative panel here, and what we want to do is make this a true conversation, but I'm going to start with, I'm not going to give you a briefing on FedRAMP. I think everyone has a basic idea of what it is. It's a standardized way to do or provide ATOs for cloud-based services and products. And the basis of it is a set of security controls that were agreed to by agencies across the government that will be applied to those cloud services and products that will be used as a basis for granting a provisional ATO that will be...
It's kind of based on the fundamental approach that since really, since the Rainbow series has been around as far as assessing the risk and through basically an assessment procedure process where you're testing security controls. And for anybody in the cybersecurity industry knows, or information assurance on the DoD side, that's done through a variety of ways. Up to the latest point with 853, et cetera, it's a series of tests, interviews, and examinations of documentation. And that role really hasn't changed, and nothing in the FedRAMP program in that respect is new. The only difference now is that the GSA, I shouldn't say GSA, but FedRAMP developed assessment procedures are basically taking a next step to deriving 853 control requirements, leveraging 53A, and then adding some additional assessment procedures and test cases to kind of go a little bit deeper, especially in areas where there's certain fundamental risks to cloud security. As our role, continues, we're basically going to be the ones coming in and assessing a cloud service provider's environment through really a systematic set of test cases that have already been established. The thing that the 3PAO has to do is they have to tailor those test cases to basically apply to that environment and to accurately be able to truly test that environment. There is some tailoring involved, and we can get into that a little bit more, but I'll
so Pat, you want to talk about it?
Sure. So, we already have a GSA ATO, and, we're in the process of submitting our application for FedRAMP. There's 10 new controls that are above the GSA control set that we had for the moderate baseline. So in the process of, deploying those controls, filling out our templates, there's a control tailoring workbook all the way up to the SSP that's part of our package that we then need to hand off to our assessor. And the assessor is an independent third-party organization. We do hire those assessors, but they do an absolute thorough job. I've been through the process once, and where a typical ATO, auditors will be on site for 2 to 5 days. Our auditors were on site for full 3 weeks during the GSA ATO when we went through that assessment process, really thoroughly going through the system because we want to make sure our systems. We have that situational awareness because in the end, this is a risk-based decision to move to cloud. And when we started moving to cloud in the early days, there wasn't any FedRAMP, so there was no, CIOs took on a lot of risk to move to the public cloud. Now that FedRAMP is coming and assessing these cloud organizations, we're opening up and we're having, our common infrastructure assessed. You can't have every customer come in and look at everyone else, other tenants you might have in your cloud. But if you have a trusted third-party advisor that everyone trusts, they can go in, they can dig into that common infrastructure and assess it. And we learned a lot during our GSA ATO. Bo Burles and the GSA team did a phenomenal job. A lot of back and forth, a lot of adjustments to the controls. And not only did they check that the control exists, they validate, they really got into it, did tests to say it's really deployed and it's deployed completely and consistently across the cloud. So from my point of view, it was refreshing to really see, assessment where it's really focuses on security. And the other thing I like about the process is, how do you do change to the information system? We want to understand how because cloud's changing constantly. We're constantly adapting our security posture and our offerings. The offering is evolving. So we need a risk management framework where we can change. Our adversaries are constantly innovating. And of course, none of our customers are ever attacked, right? But they won't admit it, but there's constantly cybersecurity threats going on against systems. And by adapting our security controls and our posture and having a risk management framework, we can introduce new controls to keep the government systems more secure. That's the kind of place we want to go with FedRAMP.
All right, so then these two will have a contract between them. Where the FedRAMP office comes in is that we did the certification of the third-party assessors, but it's up to the cloud service provider to select the third-party assessor from the list that's published. So we have no, favorites. We just have a list of certified ones, and you can pick from whichever company offers the best service to you. So once that is moving along, I'd like Keith to talk a little bit about, at DHS, I think you've done some really interesting things. You're putting your public-facing clouds, public-facing websites in the cloud, but you also have an internal cloud. So how would FedRAMP play into that strategy?
Okay, so I'll work my way out to in. So we really have, in the cloud umbrella, we have private cloud, we have public cloud. And it's really as simple as in our private cloud, which is in our two primary data centers, where we're consolidating. It's part of a larger strategy, but we're consolidating our major IT capabilities into two centers. The private cloud's where we put our sensitive data. Now we're going to get into the interesting discussion about what is sensitive, right? But it's a component of the strategy until this matures a bit, which we're very excited about the doors opening on the 6th. All sensitive goes in the centers. Our public cloud, we've got multiple services going on in the public cloud. We have a contract in place under Infrastructure as a Service. CGI won that bid, and we are aggressively moving out there. Non-sensitive or moderate and below, we're comfortable with accepting some of the risk and putting some of those services out in the public cloud. And so I'll start in the public cloud arena. So what we did there was we said, let's take all the public-facing websites for the department and consolidate those. And we're going to do it for a variety of reasons. One, we want to enhance government to citizen services. There have been messaging from the White House and others that said, let's enhance that. And of course, we firmly agree in that. The Secretary has issued out some memos further directing that guidance. And what we did on the IT side was everybody could go out to the public cloud or go out to these different environments and do it themselves. Financially, in the world that we're moving into, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we're doing is we're leveraging the CGI environment. We have built management services on top of that and the platform services. My office is serving as a service provider to the rest of the department. So how we've done this on the security side is we've taken the controls at ATO that were out of the box, GSA ATO. We have developed a risk assessment on top of those ATO controls and then framed those against our DHS moderate, as well as the FedRAMP controls that were coming down the pipe. We've developed that risk assessment, so now every one of the components that are coming on board, it's two things, a little different world. We're looking for them to accept the level of risk that we have clearly defined and articulated and providing in a transparent manner for them to understand what risk they're accepting and put the public websites out to the cloud. And that's a different paradigm, because I'm not looking for every component to go out and spend 50 to 200K to do their own CNA package on a website. So that's cost savings, right, to benefit the components. In addition to operational benefits, and that we've got pre-built services. So we package up those costs for small, medium, and large websites, and they're out there. And what's really interesting is the components are flying at us. We can't quite keep up with the volume, so we're pushing some things out to 13 to bring them on board. But this is part of the new risk paradigm that we're introducing at the department for the public cloud. In our private cloud, working our way back in, we do have about 9 different private cloud services that we are rolling out. Each one of those services we are certifying and accrediting at a certain threshold, at a minimum. They're either at moderate. Some of those services are going to be certified and accredited before one user comes on at high. That is an entirely new business model than what we did before. So similar to what we're doing in the public cloud, we're doing the same concept in our private cloud. And so what I would expect to happen is FedRAMP takes off and we get more vendors to come in. We'll be looking at our 2 data center providers in 13 to come up to that standard. We would argue that the controls that we've already built at our moderate would meet those criteria, but we're going to go through the same process that you're hearing about here in our public cloud.
So one thing I wanted to also bring up is that there was probably 2 factors, there's probably 3. One is the team, which we just talked about. Another is moving security to risk management as opposed to compliance. So I don't know how many of you are in agencies, but when the IG does an assessment of your risk environment, what they're mostly looking at is your compliance with certain controls. So it's almost a checklist. I'm not saying that FedRAMP is here to solve that in 1 year, but in fact, we have approached the IG community. We are talking to them about the slight shift from just a checklist of, did you do all this, to a more of a risk-based assessment approach, which I think is a little more difficult in that you have to really talk about how you're going to mitigate some things and what risks you're willing to accept, as opposed to saying, I'm not going to accept any risks, but in fact you are. So that's another element that I think is different from FedRAMP. And then the final thing is quality. And I'll just give a little introduction, and then I'd like you all to think about this. But if the assessments are not, if the assessment documentation aren't of a certain level of quality, agencies are not going to accept them. So, Doug, you want to talk a little bit about how, what the methodology is to make sure that there's quality, what you guys are going to do as a cloud service provider to make sure you're submitting stuff that's quality, because you don't want to go around and around, and then how you're going to look at it when the documentation comes in. First.
Okay. So one of the, for everybody that's not familiar with what the 3PAO application process required, it was actually one compliance with ISO 17020, which is for inspection bodies, and it's basically sets of criteria for your processes, your quality assurance, your quality control, your execution, and in certain cases, if in our case we're type C, where you have consulting services, how you are firewalled off or separated from consulting services versus inspection bodies. And you have to show fundamentally and not just on paper how you're separated as an organization to be able to do so that there's no conflict of interest. So as a 3PAO, our role really is to come in and assess independently, as Patrick mentioned, the cloud service provider's environment. In that capacity, we really have to have a systematic approach to doing that. And part of the application process, really, I want to commend them for this, because it's something that, as a security professional, I think a lot of people have seen the CNA process be applied differently across different agencies, definitely at the department level. You may even have different components under the departmental agency that may require additional things. And FedRAMP's process to try to standardize this and say, we've got to set kind of a bar for what's required and how. There's only 9 3POs right now, but there's going to be more. We have to have a systematic approach to do so. And it's got to be clear, it's got to be effective, and hopefully in the long run there's going to be cost savings involved in doing this assessment once, thoroughly, but doing it once and then showing that potential reciprocity to all the agencies across the board.
And we're preparing by, first of all, right now we're doing continuous monitoring. So in our cloud, we have DHS, we have GSA, and we have several other agencies. We're, doing vulnerability scanning, we're doing penetration testing, we're doing everything we need to do to maintain our GSA ATO. So that alone, shows that we're demonstrating, that we're working every day with the control set, with GSA. We're adding these 10 controls. We're also going to do a pre-assessment. So we have our own cybersecurity experts that come down into our data center. They do a pre-assessment. They do a lot of the same testing just to validate that, in our continuous monitoring, we haven't missed anything. But then, we submit a package to the 3PAO that includes our system security plan, control tailoring workbook, all our policy and process documentation, so they can do that assessment. And then we, show up for interviews and we open up our information system, in a guarded sense to the 3PAO. So we do watch their activities, but we allow them to assess the information system as it needs to be done.
So I think that's an important point. So the 3PAO is independent and it is a neutral party. One of the comments that we got in the past was, industry did not want their particular client to look at everybody's, proprietary data. So if there's a third-party assessor, that entity has an independence that they can be assured, and it's to their benefit to maintain that independence. So that is one of the structures around FedRAMP that should, mitigate the idea of, we don't want one agency knowing everything about every company because they have to do a CNA.
So I think what this all boils down to, and it's in the private sector, it's in our personal lives, and it's in the government space, it's about trust. And I think one of the new paradigms I think that's very intriguing about this is, and this administration is of course very supportive of that, is the transparency and visibility. I think the more transparency we have into our providers, I think that will help alleviate some of the concerns that we have that we're going into a black box. We can't see what's behind the curtain. We don't know if all of their folks have the right, clearance levels or things happening at 2 in the morning the way that they should when
Trust
right. It's the trust but verify I think that the business model is changing. That to me is what's so intriguing about FedRAMP, because in the conversations that I'm having internally and even with other federal agencies, this new business model to me is a kind of a triangle, right? So you've got operational risks, you've got financial risks, and we're all feeling them in the Fed space, and I know that's rippling out to the vendor community as well, those tighter budgets. And then, of course, security. So there are trade-off discussions that I know I'm having more of them in the past couple of years than what I had 5 years ago, moving to this new business model. So folks are going to have to make decisions on the type of data that I have that's in a hosted environment. Do I feel comfortable that the assessment that was done really reflects what's happening behind the scenes? And then financially and operationally, is it meeting my customers' needs? That is a whole new paradigm that I think advances the discussion and how we're ensuring that our data is protected from folks that choose to do harm. So I think that triangle, sort of keep that in mind in industry and in the private sector and in the government. We've all got to start looking at that new paradigm. And I think transparency and visibility will help all of us getting into that model. And I might add, our vendor in the public cloud has done a great job of providing us that transparency that we're looking for. And I would hope that as others come into this program, be more open and available for the federal agencies. That will help us feel more comfortable. And it's a trust curve. It's not going to happen overnight.
So that's definitely the other point that I wanted to talk about is, one of the main selling points, if you will, about FedRAMP is cost savings. All right, well, there is not going to be any cost savings if people, i.e. agencies, do not leverage these ATOs across agencies. Now, what I think will initially happen is two things. One is that agencies will be very thorough about reviewing the documentation that's submitted for the provisional ATO, and well, they should be. And then secondly, FedRAMP is flexible enough, so if there are additional controls that need to be applied because of an agency-specific security environment, that's possible. So FedRAMP is flexible enough to do that. So if you're interior and you have to have a certain number of additional controls applied, FedRAMP will accommodate that. What the program management office will do with that is if there are controls that are applied almost additionally across lots of agencies, then maybe we should look at that to be added to the set of controls. Or if controls are being misinterpreted, again, we'll be doing some trend analysis. So the program management office is not going to be the policeman, it's more going to be the oversight and hopefully tweaking, looking at how things are going through this initial operating capability, which I think will take us through the first quarter of, or the second quarter, I guess, of fiscal year 13. So I did want to talk about what kind of conversations are you guys having? You each have a client base. So is anybody talking to you about FedRAMP? Please say yes. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I'm just, you work on something so hard and you're like, so FedRAMP. I think, well, maybe nobody even thinks about this. So what's happening?
All of our customers, especially DHS, are very interested in us going through the FedRAMP process. But it's not just DHS. I mean, we have customers signing up for our cloud that have put that in the contract, so we have to go to FedRAMP, which is not a problem. We'll agree to that because we want to be there. We wanted there to be a common interpretation of the NIST guidelines across the government. Because, just last week we were looking at the different CNA processes we've had for our hosted engagements. And the amount of money we spend on them is all over the place because you never know when you go into a new agency how they're going to interpret NIST. It's not interpreted the same way across the government. So just that commonality, we're really looking forward to that. And the customers want that because they don't want to be going through these processes. And where it'll really be beneficial is in how quickly you can get to the cloud. GSA, we had 30 websites in 45 days, all with full ATM, no risk. Well, never no risk, but managed risk. But that speed, NAR, we got them up in 10 days. I think DHS, we got up in 40 days. You were the first, so.
38, but I'm not counting.
Yeah, we learned.
We were first, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we're first.
So we've gotten better, and that's really what we're looking for with FedRAMP. Everyone's asking us, when are you going to have that? And, we're just like, as soon as we can get the documents in, we plan to start the assessment process and have that as certification.
So from CSP's interest as needing a 3PO, we've definitely been contacted by multiple cloud providers, really, and they're running the gamut. Some are very experienced with government like CGI Federalist, and some are running small software as a service apps that they see the potential to be able to offer. They want that introduction into government, and they don't know anything about FISMA requirements. They don't even know the FedRAMP requirements. So we're seeing this kind of maturity scale across the board here of some are going to be a lot, quote unquote, easier and more ready to be assessed. Some are going to need a little bit and potentially a lot more time in certain cases, especially if they don't have that kind of FISMA background or never had to meet FISMA requirements. So, but I was very surprised. Just within the first day, we had calls from different CSPs.
I think on the implementation side, we have had a lot of interest within the department about, as I like to say, we believe in standards, that's why we have a lot of them. So it's kind of fun that this FedRAMP, as this moves forward on the moderate side, that's great. We have a lot of our applications that, whether it's in confidentiality, integrity, or availability, starts ticking into the high sort of space. So I think for the time being, there are more apps as FedRAMP matures that we'll be able to start leveraging folks like CGI and other providers to host for us. I think that the nuance for us is going to be, can we, within the department, look at controls at the higher level, right? So higher confidentiality for PII. Maybe integrity data needs to be higher for law enforcement data. And then availability, be able to flip it back and forth between the centers to make sure that the services are up in the mission space. That is an area that we are looking at internal to DHS. There's a lot more work to go, but we are looking to build off of what's happened with FedRAMP, because now I think we've got a floor, right? So that whether it's regulations or legislation or a variety of reasons, we may have different sets of security controls, even within a component or a program office or different projects. We may have to look at saying, can we really get to that standard? I think we can. I think FedRAMP is actually serving as that trampoline to where we can start addressing that. I think the paradigm where we start to say, well, we just did that for the past 20 years, so that's the way we're going to do that. I think that's where this model starts to challenge that old paradigm. Just because that's the way we did it for 20 years may not be the best way to look at it going forward and doing it the same way. So I'm excited for FedRAMP as serving as we now have a floor. Now, is what's on top of that wildly variant, or can we look to standardize on that as well? I think that's the trade-off discussions that we're going to have to make when we go forward.
Yeah, I would agree. The other element of FedRAMP that I didn't mention is the repository. So when companies are granted this provisional ATO, their documentation will be placed in a repository maintained by the FedRAMP PMO. So right now, we have a couple of intergovernmental tools that we're looking at. EMAS at DHS. No, DOD, sorry, DOD. And then also, believe it or not, MAX at OMB, which is not my absolute favorite system, but they have completely upgraded it. If you haven't been on it lately, you should look at it. It's pretty cool. And we need to think of a way to both control access and facilitate access at the same time. So that's something that we're working at now. If we cannot find a system by initial operating capability, which is Wednesday, so probably not by Wednesday, but if we can't find one in the next couple of weeks, we probably will have a physical repository. So agencies will be able to come over and look at documents that we will maintain in a locked room at GSA. That's sort of our beginning, but that's not where we want to stay or even maintain initial operating capability. I think the biggest thing here with the repository is the cycle or the circle of security. So what we want to be able to do is, if you, as an agency person, want to look at these documents, we have to make sure they're read-only, obviously. We have to make sure that we control access in an electronic way, and but we have to make sure that you can access them if you're authorized to do so in a fairly easy way. We don't want to put obstacles in people's way to be able to review the documentation and accept it or ask questions about it, because that to me is one of the basis of the trust thing. You're not going to accept something you can't read and understand. So between now and the end of the calendar year, my office, depending upon how it goes in terms of people or companies providing documentation in a timely manner, we're looking to have at least 3 provisional authorizations by December. So it sounds like a long time, but remember, this is a new program and we are, ironing out the steps as we go. But we're fairly confident that if the third-party assessors and the cloud service providers, are prepared, that we should be able to do that. One of the things, so there's 2 documents I think that have not been listed on FedRAMP.gov that will be there by Wednesday. One is the guide to FedRAMP, using FedRAMP, and another is the application. And in the guide to using FedRAMP, there is a page there that, I can't remember the title, but basically it talks about what I would call threshold controls. There are certain things in our experience with infrastructure as a service, there's certain controls that agency or the companies need to be able to meet. And if they can't, they should probably delay their application to FedRAMP until they can. So 2 examples of that would be dual-factor authentication. So if you're not doing that yet, probably you shouldn't apply for FedRAMP right away. You probably should figure out how you're going to address that. Another example, again, there are several more, but another example would be the ability to describe your boundaries in a way that's complete, but doesn't include, your entire company. So we have had many discussions with companies for infrastructure as a service where there was a discussion about the preciseness of the boundary that was described so that you know what you're granting your ATO for. So I think that those are a couple of things that companies should be looking at when they're moving forward to decide whether or not they can go and get a FedRAMP ATO granted by the Joint Authorization Board. Now, there's one thing that I want to also mention, and that is, while FedRAMP is mandatory, the Joint Authorization Board provisional authorization is not mandatory. So what's mandatory is that agencies have to use this set of controls when they are deploying a cloud-based service or product. So they can do it internally. There is a set of controls. There's free access to that. That's been up there since, I think, February at least, the final version. So agencies, CISOs, can just incorporate that and use that as the basis for their ATO. They're not required to go through the FedRAMP JAB authorization. The benefit to the FedRAMP job authorization is that it's a little bit more authoritative because of the 3 signatories, and I think it might be a better way to get this leverage thing going. I mean, to be honest with you, right now, agencies can leverage other agencies' ATOs. That can happen now. But it's not happening, and in our analysis, one of the problems was that these controls were not, but there was not a standard set of them, and they were not applied in a standard way. So what the FedRAMP control set does is allow you to have a standard set of controls with standard guidance. Yeah. So what do you guys think about from a year from now? Is there going to be cobwebs on FedRAMP, or are we going to do it? Or?
Absolutely not. I mean, we'll have a lot of references to our FedRAMP documentation, because we're seeing, so much interest in, this common certification and really level setting the cloud services. Because there's a lot of hype around cloud, if you haven't noticed.
Where's that?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not all the same. You'll get all these people saying, "Oh, we're federally certified cloud provider," and then that's why we actually built our own cloud, is because we started looking at these federally certified cloud providers, and when you once you start digging in, there's controls that aren't met. So how can you say that you're federally certified? So it just gets to FedRAMP will be an even slate. You're buying a service that's been certified. On the front letter, it says what controls are being provided, which ones the agencies need to provide. And like if you're going into IIS, you do have to realize you are deploying an application on top of the infrastructure. So there's some controls, the agency is still responsible for, but FedRAMP, at least I think it's still this way, I know it is with GSA, they list those controls on your provisional ATO, and they say an agency going into this cloud still needs to deploy these, and it's a logical one, access to your application. Well, the cloud provider doesn't provide that. You're running the application on top of the cloud provider, so that's something that, in this case, if it wasn't a SaaS offering, any agency would have to provide that control. So I think it'll be very well used in the next year.
I'm excited because as an individual responsible for deploying a lot of these capabilities, trying to go between different vendors and kind of guess what controls they have and what my customers want, trying to bring that vast ecosystem together is a whole lot of fun. And our deputy CIO sitting there, Margie Graves, would probably agree. We spend a lot of time bringing the customers to the table, understanding what they want, and then the service providers. And it's nice to kind of get a floor. So a year from now, what do I see a year from now? I said, if I'm in industry, I would think, boy, I tell you, if the feds could come up with and say, this is how you want to do business with me, that would be really helpful, right? I think from our perspective, if we can communicate and say from the security side, this is how we want you to do business with us. And then can we incorporate that into our contractual language? So now we're formally talking with you and get consistency in how we communicate with industry, I think would be extremely valuable, because these forums are great and we need to continue those, and we're not going to be successful if industry's over here. It's like the old 7th grade dance, industry's over here, and government's over here, and we stand in the corner and wait till a certain song, and then at the end of the night everybody comes and dances. It's similar to that, right? We can't do that. We have got to do it with everybody in the same room, working in concert, and I've seen that with FedRAMP, really industry coming together very closely. But operationally, I would envision that in our contracts, where I don't see a lot of that in the past. We'll say, comply with that, such and such agency security requirement. Well, now we know what those requirements are on the security side. And that's exciting. So not only operationally, when a new contract is awarded, here's the services that you're going to be building on top of, and that's kind of new. Here's the security controls associated with that. Here's the standard. So from an operational deployment, instead of 12, 18, 24 months to deploy a capability, we're talking, a month, 2 months to put capabilities on the ground. And as a taxpayer, that makes me excited.
I agree. Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the FedRAMP program. I think anybody who's followed kind of NIST and risk management framework and its evolution, kind of this goal of standardizing the way we, look at security and worry about security, and then actually, in our case, how we assess security. There's a felt need there that we need to do this better. We need to do this, in some cases, faster, in some other cases, cheaper, hopefully. It may not, this is a new program, it may not be realized yet, but I can tell you, I think Patrick would rather accredit something once rather than have to go to each agency and try to go through their accreditation process all over again each time, starting over from scratch. because they use different templates. They have different requirements. Some are using automation tools. Some are still using manual Word documents, Excel files. And this is that first step to try to standardize everything. So I think there's a very strong felt need, and I think that the communication of getting people together is going to be key to make this successful. And the interest is there, we just have to act on it now.
So I think we should open up the floor to questions. Do we have any? Yes, Marty.
So you mentioned components that are being done in the
Mhm.
So I can imagine there are a variety of reasons for that. Certain costs, certain factors you all develop.
Can you stand up so people can hear you? Yeah. I'm sorry.
So I can imagine there are a variety of reasons for components being down the door.
Sure.
Is it cost? Is it that they want to be first as well? Is it they feel like they've been dragging? What are all the reasons you think for that besides certification?
So, you're too kind. In any business, whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector, and I look at what I do within the department as I'm providing services, so I'm my own little business, if you will, a push model works so far. A pull model is what happens in the private sector. If you have a good service at a good price and you're offering good value, customers will come to you. And I believe that in our private cloud, we have had good successes, and we're going to continue to build on those. We do have customers coming at us and saying, look, I really don't want to be in the platform and infrastructure business anymore. I'd like to buy a service. Tell me my SLAs. I can get involved in some of the governance, but how much am I paying per user, per unit of capability? And I'll go with that. I think in the mission space, deep into the bowels of the mission, there's a little bit of hesitancy probably to go all in on buying consumption service. In the public cloud, it's public-facing websites, right? So in the private sector, there are a bunch of companies that do that all day long, and they're very good at it. I think where we have been successful is we are taking everything from the security, from the infrastructure, to the management services, to all the things that a CIO is typically responsible for, and we're bearing that sort of behind the scenes. So what the customer gets, and my customers, I'm saying CIO and public affairs or communications offices, they don't have to do any of that anymore. They need to figure out, you want blue up there? We have templates available for them. We have to figure out how to migrate data in, but they don't have to do some of those things that they had to do in the past. Time to market, it's cheaper to do it. I can have more flexibility than what I had in my current environment. But my security is even better in this environment than what I have in my old environment. So when you look at them, they're outsourcing their capability to me. So we're providing that back out, and it's just much easier to do business that way. And we've got our costing that we're sharing out with each of these customers. And I think you could argue one of the first times, you're getting full transparency of what I'm paying for. And I think those things all go into the mix of why do I want to go to this service provider than the others. Now we'll bring up, Marcia, bring up a great point. Who goes first? Some people are, I'll go first. There are others, and Margie and I know who some of those are, that are more comfortable with saying, hey, I'll go third. I love it. It sounds great. Give me some of those services. It sounds awesome. I'll go third. So you get the bumps and bruises on first and second. I get that, right? But I think to be a leader or a pioneer in this space, you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to take those hits first. That's why all of the services that we're rolling out at corporate, whether it's email or the collaboration or the dev test or the public cloud or any of these other ones, we're going first. And we're going to take all of those lessons learned and share those best practices with either other CIOs within DHS or other CIOs at other federal agencies, and we're doing that. We're getting better at packaging up a whole bunch of stuff and say, hey, CIO X at this particular agency, here's our condoms. This is how we went to market. Here's how we packaged up services and then did pricing units back out to our customers. The same as the private sector does. That's where I think our value-added role in a CIO is, how do we get CIOs out of the day-to-day minutia of platform and infrastructure and get into where really I think the value of the CIO, more of a chief sort of strategic role, where we're sitting down with the business customers and we're talking about business application and mission services. I think if we can take care of the platform and below, then I think the sky's the limit on what we can do with our business partners. Long answer to a short question.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a two-part question. First, the discussion's focused on primarily assessing, certification, and then documentation. And Patrick mentioned continuous monitoring. But is there feedback in any of that where when we start looking at malware threats, audit log anomalies, those kind of issues that are more big, is there feedback to the assessors, is it to the organization? And the second part is, who is the ultimate risk owner? The organization? Where does risk reside? Does that drive the cost model when you look at risk? And what are the cost model for additional risk? And then where's the feedback?
Okay, I'll answer the risk part. So the reason that we're calling the authorization that's granted by the Joint Authorization Board provisional is because, according to FSMA, the CIO for the specific agency has to accept the risk. So ultimately, the owner of the risk is the CIO for that agency, and that's in compliance with FSMA. When we first started, we were thinking, okay, these three can sign, and then that whole thing can be leveraged. But in fact, it still is a matter of the CISO recommending the signature of the CIO to that particular instance of the cloud service. So the owner ultimately is the CIO of the risk. In terms of continuous monitoring, right now, as it stands, the continuous monitoring requirements are the same as they are right now. So US CERT, and I think we're working with them and and CyberScope, we're working with them. They are going to be releasing some documentation fairly soon that talks about a next evolution in continuous monitoring. But right now, the current method of operation is what's going to be in place on Wednesday when we start the initial operating capability.
Right, and there is full transparency. I mean, the information owner, at the agency is the information owner. So we provide those feeds to them. Under FedRAMP, there's the option of, you either provide it to the agency or you can provide it directly to DHS. I think in most cases, we prefer to provide it through the agency, but we'll have that capability if an agency prefers to send it to DHS directly. And that'll include, the continuous monitoring. And actually, under FedRAMP, we reassess a third of the controls every year, so we're constantly reassessing, as part of that continuous monitoring program.
And specific to your question about malware threats or whatever, it's going to be tailored to your specific environment. So, if your software is a service and data input is limited to a website that has just field data, and there's no way to attach a document or attach, some sort of external potential malicious code insert, we have to tailor the assessments to focus on that. And threat sources in general, usually when you're doing a risk assessment, have traditionally been just, here's my blanket set of threats. Well, FedRAMP is taking this, to the next level and looking at threats seriously, so that when we come in and do the assessment, we're actually taking into what is the function of this system or this infrastructure, and where are the input sources? Where are your attack vectors or potential threat sources? You have to incorporate that into the assessment. So that's going to ripple through not only the FedRAMP assessment procedures, but also any penetration test that goes on and any potential source code reviews. You've got to take those threats into account. So that's going to be factored into the initial assessment and then any testing ongoing.
Right, and any cloud provider to really provide that situational awareness, you have to integrate and correlate your antivirus, your IDPS, and many different things to provide that single pane of glass. So if there was malware in the system, our SOC would be aware of it. There would be a call out to the agency that if the agency is responsible, that we're supporting that application to us to fix it.
Okay, other questions? Yeah.
So to continue with the day-to-day analogy, the sites are the us, the sites of the gym. How do we get folks together? And what are the roadblocks that we envision that they're holding us back? How do we create that to be?
Okay, so some of the things we've done to date are, we're going to start a state of the 3 PAOs. We have released all of our controls, our ConOps, lots of documents for comment, and we'll continue to do that. So I don't envision us, aside from, well, even the guide to operating FedRAMP or to using FedRAMP will come out as a final document, but we'll still accept comments, especially as we move forward through the initial operating capabilities where, there's lots of things probably that we have anticipated that we're going to have to tweak. And there is a way on fedramp.gov to send issues or concerns or questions that you have. We also have a frequently asked questions site where we're trying to update that as much as possible. But I think the head stuff, like the SIG for the 3PAO, probably will start doing some things with agencies. We're going to have an agency day on June 12th at Interior, so anyone who's a Fed, please come. And basically, it's going to be a couple of minutes, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, sort of with a revamp or a refresh for FedRAMP. Then the majority of the day is going to be questions about, what do agencies have to do? How do they start? What's the requirement? That kind of stuff. So we are trying to do that. As probably you all know, I used to be a contractor as well. It's difficult to have that same kind of, group meeting for contractors because they don't want to ask questions in front of their competition. So for those audience, we are going to try doing webinars. So I think it'll be better. It can be replayed, and also the questions are not attributable. So it'll be, I think, a little more neutral. So that's what we're starting out with. But as we go along, I think we'll try to use more and more different kinds of, we should use Twitter. We actually have a Twitter account. So when I go back, I'm going to start making them tweet about whatever. But anyway, about FedRAMP. But we do have a Twitter account. We do have, as I said, this website that's fairly robust. So that's what we've done to date. Do you guys have any other ideas about what we might do?
I'd love to hear from the two in the industry,
Yeah.
what some of your thoughts are to make sure your voice in the industry is heard by us.
Sure. I think, the FedRAMP team has been very interactive, first of all. So we met on many, it's IAC, Tech America, FedScoop, so I think there's been a lot of interaction. And, we just want we want the cloud to innovate. We want it to see new offerings. We want it's changing so fast that, we've given that feedback. We provided 76 comments on the documentation to FedRAMP, and they were very receptive. So I think it'll be that ongoing, working with the PMO to really get that perspective. And, anytime we've sent in questions to FedRAMP, they've been very responsive to us on those. So I do see that continuing. And for the ISPPA, there is a working group, which I'm sure FedRAMP would participate in that as well. So.
And Susie is doing a bunch of stuff too, right? Yeah.
I was going to say from the way the process is kind of outlined also, it's, as an assessor, oftentimes if we would just go out and be contracted directly by a data center provider, we would be asked to do an assessment with a set of controls. We may not actually, in some cases, have very much interaction with the government side of things. That's completely different in FedRAMP. There is an actually very interactive process where right from initiation, the FedRAMP PMO is going to sign an ISSO, who's then going to meet with the CSP and the 3PAO to actually work out a schedule, work out all the issues and questions. And there's going to be a lot of questions initially. So I think just the way the program is formatted right now, that's going to kind of, not I don't want to say force collaboration, but it's going to encourage collaboration and communication. So I'm very optimistic in that sense that you can get the parties together. From the government side, the customer base, I think that all of this is going to help kind of alleviate some of the agency's concerns when they actually start looking into this process a little bit more and realizing how well it was thought out and all the players that were involved in this, DHS, NIST, GSA, and many other industries provided comments, etc. All the parts are there to really, kind of make this a collaborative effort and move it along together.
Jason?
So I'm going to cause a little trouble. It's okay.
Good.
I'll let everyone is ready. I think the big question that's hanging on when I talk to CIOs in private and other people in government, and vendors too, so I'm going to put those to Keith because you're the one that's up there.
Sure, I'll take the hard one.
Thank you. And so let's say, let's say CGI didn't work for you, but let's say they get their they go through the 3PAO, they go through the JAB, they go through their provisional authority, and you want to hire CGI. Do you look at the JAB and what the JAB says is, I'm good to go, let's just use them? Or do you then re-look at 20%, 50%, 80% of their controls? Because when Katie asked, where is FedRAMP going to be in a year, it all comes down to whether CIOs and CISOs and such trust what the JAB did. And if the JAB, if you trust them, but you only trust them so far because you're the one that gets called before Congress, and you're the one who has to answer when your article's on Federal News Radio, because you know that's what we do. And but can you give me a sense of how you're feeling? Now I know it's kind of odd because DHS is on the JAB.
Right.
So if Richard Spire signs off and goes, yes, this is good, you have less to do. But in the sense, if there's another CIO here who's not on the JAB, they have a different, their bar's a little different. So can you just kind of maybe try to address that?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I think every CIO is going to have to look at this thing and say, and I think not everything can be the crown jewels, right? So there may be some areas that they will say, it has gone through the JAB, it has gone through all of these processes. I feel comfortable, and I'm willing to say, I'm not going to have my folks spend 6 months redoing what everybody just did here, because let's face it, there are some applications and services that are more visible to my mission than others. And I think where that cut line is, I think that certain CIOs are going to have to look at this thing and say, I know my CISO is telling me they want to provide more value. All the ISOs that roll up to the CISO say, but I've got more value to add. There's going to have to be a point in time where I think they're going to have to say, look, this level and below, I'm going to accept that. It's gone through the JAB. We've got the folks that run the program. We've got DoD and DHS. There's going to have to be a point where they say, I trust it. I trust it's been vetted. And there are other applications where they're probably going to say, I'll do a little bit more due diligence. But I think once they go through a couple of these, right, a year from now, and they've got a couple under their belt, I think they're going to be a lot more comfortable with saying, I don't need the additional value add. I'm going to take what's been done here. But I don't think there's going to be any one blanket, one size fits all. There are going to be apps that folks will probably spend a little bit more time on. I really hope that CIOs look at this and other AOs or whatever, you know, each component or agency says it a little differently. They're going to have to accept a little bit of trust that due diligence has been done. And I'm hoping, I am truly hoping that we get to that point in the next 12 to 18 months. Just got to